Mr. Miller here is actually a high school grad. But you know what? He's teaching Spanish to everyone getting ready for college class. Crazy, right?
With those words, Neil started handing out letter-sized printouts. The printouts were covered in dense Spanish passages. He is my colleague, a Harvard grad, but sneers at me for just having a high school diploma, yet here I am, teaching Spanish at this boarding school. He demanded me to translate a complex Spanish passage on the spot. It was all a scheme to embarrass me in front of the students. This is irrelevant to today's lesson, isn't it?
Well, don't run away now. You always act like academic background doesn't matter. But you know, I think education is important, because it shows how capable someone is, right? If you don't care about academic background, then show us what you're made of. Show us the level of Spanish you have as a high school graduate.
I mean,
What's the matter? Can't do it. If you can't, maybe it's best you leave. It's disrespectful to the students and to us.
the students watched us, clearly confused. That had nothing to do with the lesson, but I had no choice. I steeled myself and spoke up. Then, I could see Neil's face turning pale right before my eyes. My name is Duke Miller. I'm about to turn 30 next month. I spent a long time caring for my grandparents, but an unexpected opportunity brought me back to the boarding school I once attended. Here, we mainly offer foundational courses to support schoolwork and intensive courses for preparation to go to college. Our school not only offers regular group classes, but also individual instruction and online classes, which makes it one of the largest boarding schools statewide. The standard setup involves selecting 60-minute sessions for various subjects, where students can work on their weaknesses with support from different teachers. As new students come in each year, we have to start considering different strategies for each level. At the end of every semester, there's a buzz in the air to start strategizing for the next one. Today, we're having a meeting focused on these preparations. This area, having seen a surge in new housing developments, has a high number of children. Of course, there are quite a few students coming in for preparing to go to college. So we need to pick out several candidate colleges. Though, first of all, we focus on guidance to improve your academic performance score within the school, and then we prepare for the essays and interviews that each college has as their entrance requirements. Most colleges discussed in meetings are within an hour's drive, relatively close. While most teachers were familiar with them, I've been out of touch with recent university trends, so I couldn't keep up in some discussions. Then, a colleague who had recently joined us asked me a question.
Mr. Miller, you've been here in your hometown all along, right? Did you go to a different college?
Certainly, that's what most people would think if they didn't know anything about it. So, I decided to be honest about it. Well, something like that. I said with a wry smile. Most of my colleagues here weren't particularly surprised because they knew my circumstances. However, one guy in front of me who I didn't know leaned in with keen interest and asked,
Wow, so you're a high school grad? That's impressive, being a teacher at a boarding school with just a high school diploma.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't too bothered by his comments, but he kept staring at me with great interest. He was introduced as Neil Walker, a new teacher who joined us a year ago. Apparently, he was flaunting his Harvard graduation, and students who took his classes not only improved their grades but also secured admissions to their desired universities. Thanks to such testimonials spreading by word of mouth, our enrollments increased, and he became the most popular teacher in the school, earning immense trust from parents. When I was subjected to such a piercing gaze from that remarkable teacher, it felt as though I'm being labeled as a high school grad, making me somewhat uncomfortable. I managed a smile in front of everyone, but his persistent glances bothered me, and I couldn't focus on the conversation. The next day, as usual, I exchanged greetings with my colleagues and headed to my desk to prepare for my lessons.
Good morning, Mr. Miller.
Good morning. It was unusual for Neil to greet me, and recalling yesterday's conversation brought back unpleasant feelings.
Oh man, I gotta say, I was surprised yesterday. I mean, I've never heard of a high school grad becoming a teacher. What kind of approach did you use?
Pardon? I was at a loss for words.
So, Mr. Miller, you didn't go to college, right?
Well, it's not like I didn't go to.
What? You're being pretty vague. How can someone with such a sketchy background be trusted with students? You know, students' futures are at stake here. If you're careless with your teaching, you could ruin their lives.
I take my teaching very seriously. Then, with a sigh, he heavily slapped his hand down on my desk. I involuntarily flinched.
Don't get ahead of yourself.
Excuse me.
I've made a name for myself with my Harvard background. You're just a high school grad, right? Dropouts don't get a say.
With that, he walked away briskly to leave no room for me to interject. What's with that guy? From that day on, Neil's attitude towards me became noticeably colder. In our school, it's customary for available teachers to join students in classes, to maintain a sense of engagement and readiness. Today, I happened to have some free time and got the chance to sit in on Neil's class. Despite feeling down because of our recent interaction, I was curious about his teaching. As the class bell rang and he entered the room, his every move radiated the confidence of a popular teacher. However, once the lesson started, it quickly advanced beyond my grasp, leaving me struggling to keep up. Honestly, parts of what he was teaching were hard to follow. Naturally, there was no opportunity to ask questions. He seemed to have carefully prepared for each class daily, building his lessons on his own theories. I tried my best to understand, but the number of question marks in my head only increased. The class flowed smoothly with only his voice and the sound of his mechanical pencil filling the room. Suddenly, he singled out a student. It seemed the student had fallen asleep. Humans have a limit to their concentration, so that can happen. Yet, Neil began scolding him mercilessly in front of the other students.
You want to go to college, right? With other teachers. Maybe slacking off could slide. But remember, I graduated from Harvard. If you're motivated, listen to my lecture till the end. Got it?
Overwhelmed by his intensity, the student shrank back, nodding vigorously before looking down. Is being a Harvard grad really that prestigious? Why is he so fixated on academic credentials? Personally, I don't think my educational background has anything to do with my ability to teach. I've hardly ever discussed my own background with the students or other teachers, nor do I plan to. To me, a boarding school is a place to teach, and a teacher's role is to fully meet the students' needs. Of course, this involves studying on my part, and sometimes I even seek advice from my colleagues. The director understands my stance, but concerned about Neil's confrontations, he often suggests,
Mr. Miller, why don't you open up about yourself?
To which I usually respond, educational background and the ability to convey knowledge are two different things. And leave it at that. Then came a certain day. I was at my wit's end. Without my knowledge, my teaching assignment had been changed. In our school, in the basic course, one teacher handles multiple subjects on a rotating basis each week. However, in the college preparation course, each subject has a dedicated teacher, and I'm in charge of Spanish. It was the day for the high school level Spanish class in the college preparation course. However, for some reason, there was Neil's name instead of mine. Normally, such changes by the school are fine as long as they're agreed upon by the parties involved, but he changed it without saying a word to me. Concerned about the impact on the students' learning, I confronted him to ask not to make such unilateral decisions, but with an indifferent expression, he justified his actions by saying,
I just felt sorry for the students being taught by a high school grad like you. It's like I'm helping out, thinking of the students. If you don't like it, you can just quit.
His tyranny wasn't just directed at me but extended to other teachers as well. Everyone had grievances against him, but because he was a popular teacher with a Harvard background, they often had no choice but to accept the situation silently. This can't go on. Just as I was thinking so, an incident that would change my life occurred. On that day, I was scheduled to teach a college preparation course class for the first time in a while. The plan was to review the sections that everyone found difficult as a final push, and the students were seriously scanning their notes. However, the moment the bell for class to start rang, the classroom door suddenly opened.
It's Neely.
Neely's joining the class too?
The classroom instantly became noisy. Neely was the nickname the students had for Neil. The director's policy here is to address teachers formally by their last names, but Neil had somehow convinced the students to call him by his nickname to want to foster a sense of closeness in his classes. I put down the textbook I was holding and called out to him, "Mr. Walker, what's going on? We're in the middle of class." I hadn't been informed that any other teacher would be taking my class on that day. But without listening to me, he pushed past and raised his voice in front of everyone.
Hey everyone, you won't believe this. Mr. Miller here is quite something. Can you believe he didn't even go to college? He's a high school grad, and yet he's teaching you all Spanish. Impressive, right?
Saying that, he started handing out letter-sized printouts. They were filled with long Spanish passages. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a long Spanish comprehension question, and unbelievably, it was the same level as a language class of famous prestigious university. Naturally, it was extremely difficult for the students to solve.
Neely, what's this?
With the students looking on in shock, Neil continued with his eyes shining.
This is an actual Spanish reading to be equivalent to a college level. Of course, it's difficult to solve right away, but Mr. Miller can surely read it smoothly, right? After all, he's in a position where he's teaching crucial Spanish to students, regardless of his educational background.
This has nothing to do with the lesson.
Oh, come on, don't run away. You always say that educational background doesn't matter, but I think it's pretty important. It shows how capable someone is, right? If you're not bothered by educational background, then show us your skills.
But you know.
What is it? You can't do it. If you can't, maybe you should just quit.
What? The students looked at us, bewildered. Unconcerned by the students' reactions, he went on to say something outrageous to me.
Mr. Miller, I'll give you till the end of the class. Translate every single word perfectly, okay?
Neil had a smug look on his face. Clearly, he was plotting to expose my lack of formal education in front of the students and humiliate me.
Well then, while he is working hard, let's get started our class, shall we?
Saying that, he was about to open the textbook in my place. However, at that moment,
The moon is beautiful, isn't it?
I said.
Huh?
Neil was taken aback. I continued translating the Spanish passage without minding him. The classroom was enveloped in silence. The students were listening intently. I translated smoothly without stumbling, making it understandable even to high schoolers, and finished reading the entire passage.
That's it.
The students then burst into applause.
This is a famous piece from American literature in Spanish. Literary giants often use complex metaphors, making translation quite challenging. Even I found it a bit difficult.
Saying so, I walked to the bookshelf at the back of the classroom, picked up a novel book, and returned to the podium.
Here, take this.
I said that and handed it to Neil.
What's this all of a sudden?
Mr. Walker, a Harvard grad like you can surely read this easily, right? Go ahead, please.
Well, one moment.
I read it smoothly in front of everyone. Now, Mr. Walker, please show us your ability.
I pressed him calmly. What I had given him was a textbook containing Spanish long reading passages from another famous college class. Reluctantly opening the book, he tried to translate but kept stumbling and hesitating, unable to read smoothly. That's to be expected. When faced with unexpected situations, it's natural to panic and go blank. Quickly, jeers flew from the students, and the classroom was filled with commotion.
What? Neely can't do it? But he's from Harvard, right?
Man, not so great after all.
Quiet, please. I banged the textbook on the table to calm the students down. They were amused by the spectacle, and grinning at Neil. He hung his head in shame with his face red.
Mr. Walker, this is an important time for them. Would you mind leaving the classroom, please?
Sure.
Saying so, he trudged out of the classroom. I apologized to the stunned students and resumed the class. The class ended without further incident. I was sitting in the staff room with Neil.
Mr. Walker, what was that all about?
The director, red-faced with anger, confronted a downcast Neil. According to the director, he had found it strange that only our classroom was noisy when classes were supposed to quiet down once they started. When he came to check, he witnessed the commotion from outside the classroom. Even the usually lenient director had reached his limit.
Well, it's not like I was trying to disrupt the class.
Neil's voice was weaker than usual, unthinkable for the person he was.
If that wasn't disruption, then what was it?
I'm sorry.
With him utterly deflated, the director started lecturing him. Then, the director turned to me, urging me to talk about my background. It was a headache-inducing situation, but I couldn't say I was entirely blameless for not having opened up before. I started to speak hesitantly. I've never experienced to belong to the college, but that's a story in the US. Strictly speaking, I'm not a high school graduate. Due to my parents' work circumstances, I moved to Spain after graduating from junior high school. I hate to brag, but I was pretty good at studying, so I skipped high school and graduated from college at the age of 18. Naturally, translating Spanish texts was a piece of cake for me. But, when I first moved, it was one struggle after another. Everything, including daily life, was in Spanish, so I had no choice but to use it every day. Of course, as I got used to it, my Spanish for daily conversations improved, but since there were no other similar students like me around, I stood out a lot among my classmates. It was a rough environment back then, and although I resented my situation, I didn't want to worry my parents, so I desperately studied hard and improved my Spanish through my own efforts. As I approached graduation from college, I was pondering what path to take in my future. I was in the midst of exploring my future while working on my thesis. My grandparents in the US fell ill. Since my parents had always been working, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that I was raised by my grandparents until I moved to Spain. My parents seemed to be considering putting them in a facility, but I felt the need to repay their kindness, so I decided to return to the US after graduating from college. The once towering figures of my grandparents, who had seemed larger than life to me as a child, seemed smaller and weaker than anyone else. I never imagined a day would come when I would think of the people who raised me in such a way. While hiding my painful feelings, I began caring for them with the help of the assigned care manager and caregivers. Although I received financial assistance from my parents for caregiving, I had to earn my own living expenses. Then, to balance caregiving and work, I started working as a teacher, which offered relatively flexible schedules. During the day, I juggled household chores and caregiving, and in the evenings, I went to work. Even after returning home, I still had to take care of them, and with the worry of wandering, I couldn't let my guard down for a moment. Thanks to that, I could only manage to get 2 or 3 hours of sleep each night. However, as the level of caregiving increased, so did the burden, and I had no choice but to quit my job as a teacher. I was gradually pushed into a corner. I wondered how long that uncertain caregiving life would continue. After a long period of caregiving, my grandparents passed away one after another. My parents and relatives who were back in town also gathered, and we were able to spend some quality family time together. After the ceremonies for both of them were over, I decided to return to the school where I used to work. The head of the school had been in touch with me even after I quit my job, showing concern for my situation.
If you are okay with it, why don't you come back?
When he reached out to me like that, amidst the emptiness I felt after losing my grandparents, I couldn't help but feel grateful. But at the same time, I was anxious about the several years of gap in my career. However, my other colleagues warmly welcomed me back, treating me as if nothing had happened. While I was speaking my background, Neil just listened quietly without saying anything. But suddenly, he stood up from his chair and said,
Mr. Miller, I did something terrible, even though I didn't know the circumstances. I'm sorry.
He finally apologized to me, but that incident was not something that could be resolved with just an apology. The next day, Neil's actions became known to all the students in no time, and naturally, it reached the ears of the parents as well. Besides, the fact that I translated difficult Spanish passages flawlessly became a topic of conversation. Every time I passed by in the hallway, I was stared at as if I were a celebrity, which made me thoroughly embarrassed.
Hi, Mr. Miller. What kind of Spanish text are you going to translate today?
I can't even get into your class even if I want to.
All I could do was smile wryly at that. Well, it's better than having a bad reputation, I guess. On the other hand, the bad reputation towards Neil didn't seem to stop.
In Neely's class, he talks so fast, it's really hard to understand.
Being a Harvard University graduate is impressive and all, but isn't he bragging too much?
Like that, students who had been taking Neil's classes so far kept requesting class changes, and complaints from parents flooded in daily, which kept the office staff busy with responses. Neil desperately tried to defend himself, but there were no colleagues to back him up. It was understandable because they had their classes stolen from him and their methods criticized. As a result, Neil rapidly fallen from the position of popular teacher, and ended up quitting the school. Humans, despite being captivated by the brilliant career of a Harvard University graduate, once the gloss is removed, envy towards the high academic achievement often leads to launching a simultaneous attack. Back when I was in college, I've seen classmates and teachers like that countless times, so all I could feel for him was pity. Still, it's his own fault for continuously looking down on people based solely on their academic backgrounds. This could be an opportunity for him to deeply reflect on his actions. According to rumors, after leaving the school, he's been leveraging his Harvard University graduate brand and collaborating with his friends as a quiz-based YouTuber. I heard about it from the school director and watched some of his videos, and indeed, they were captivating for students. However, unlike the previous Neil, there was not a trace of an atmosphere where he flaunted his academic background, and there were quite a few videos incorporating moral elements. When I watched his introductory video, he talked about how he studied hard because his parents only had a high school education, and that's why he got into Harvard University. Come to think of it, I don't know anything about him except that he's a Harvard grad. He also had his own struggles and worked hard as a school teacher. By the way, this video seems to have the most views, and the comments section is filled with words of encouragement for them. This marks a new starting point for Neil. With his wonderful charm, not just as a Harvard University graduate, he'll surely entertain the viewers. As usual, I'm teaching classes to students. Thanks to my reputation for being proficient in Spanish, more students are hoping to take my classes, and I've been honored with the title of a popular teacher. There's always one question that comes up when class starts.
Mr. Miller, which college did you go to?
You've become famous for translating those difficult Spanish texts.
I wonder if I could become like you if I went to the same university as you.
That incident had become a legend among the students, and I was getting tired of it. Comments like,
"There's no way you could become like him."
and stories about the incident got brought up, and the classroom quickly became noisy.
Quiet.
With my shout, the classroom quickly falls silent.
This is a good opportunity. Since you're aiming for college, I want you to keep this in mind. Oh, you don't need to write down what I'm about to say in your notes.
With that, I took a seat and faced everyone. Education is not everything. When I was in Spain, I've seen many people who were better at studying than me, but those people had more humanity than anyone else and had exceptional ambition. Meeting them was a treasure for a lifetime, and I still respect them from the bottom of my heart. Some friends couldn't advance in education due to their family backgrounds but went to university while working and even entered doctoral programs. On the other hand, some were headhunted by top companies from part-time jobs and led multiple successful businesses. Going to a good university doesn't necessarily make you a great person, and not being able to study well doesn't make you a bad person. You're all studying hard now, but for what purpose? It's not just about acquiring knowledge. It's important how you use your ability to study hard, to excel in extracurricular activities. I hope you become people who can use those abilities well. Everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses. I hope you never become the kind of person who looks down on others who can't do something. With the image of Neil in the hardworking videos in mind, I taught and advised my students.